LA is on fire again. Only this time it's protests and riots. And for the first time in years, the National Guard is on US soil, not for a foreign war, but because of immigration. Now, depending on who you ask, it's either an invasion that must be stopped or a humanitarian disaster that proves how heartless we've become. But if we don't see what's really happening underneath all of this, then you'll end up defending something that Jesus never would. So let's break down what's really happening, expose what both sides miss, and how a gospel perspective changes everything. To understand what's really going on in LA, you need to know what just happened and why it exploded so fast. This all started with the immigration raids. On Friday morning, ICE agents stormed multiple sites across Los Angeles, bursting into places like clothing warehouses and the fashion district. People filmed as agents in riot gear dragged workers into unmarked vans. People shouted at the agents, some threw things at them, and others spray-painted ICE trucks in real time. And here's where things really started to escalate. One of the people arrested was David Huerta, the president of SEIU California. So when people saw that a union leader was slammed to the ground and hauled off, the tension boiled over. And by Saturday, it was chaos.
Los Angeles has suffered its third and worst day of the riot so far.
Protesters and federal agents clashing in Southern California.
Los Angeles, City of Angels, now on fire.
In Paramount, a Latino-majority neighborhood, protesters showed up after ICE raided a Home Depot where day laborers gathered. The chant was simple: ICE, go home. But by 4 p.m., things only got worse. Rocks were flying, bottles shattered windshields. One Molotov cocktail reportedly injured 3 deputies. A car was set on fire in the middle of an intersection. Riot cops moved in, and Trump deployed the National Guard. For the first time in decades, a president sent US troops into the state without the governor's permission. Armored vehicles rode into LA, streets were locked down, protesters were tear gassed outside of the federal detention center downtown. Now, some are calling it justice, and others are calling it martial law. But here's why things get so complicated for those of us that are Christian. On the one hand, when we look at all of the chaos going on in LA right now, it makes it easy for us to understand those who say, rules are rules. You shouldn't be here illegally, and you knew the risk, you broke the law, so now you pay the price. Now, some might hear this as hate, but at the same time, borders matter. That's how civilizations work. Law matters. If we abandon that, we don't get justice, we get anarchy. And on top of that, Christians are called to uphold justice in places like Romans 13 with the call for civil authority. I mean, really think about it. A government that doesn't enforce its own laws is a government that can't protect anyone. And in times like this, when trafficking is real and cartels are organized and systems are overwhelmed, there's a genuine concern for protecting families, maintaining order, and keeping vulnerable people safe. So the concern is valid. Law isn't the enemy. A concern doesn't make you un-Christ-like. In fact, it might be exactly the kind of wisdom that Proverbs tells us to walk in. Okay, but on the other hand, we also don't want to let our concern for order blind us to human pain. From the perspective of the pro-immigration side, their claim is that everyone has a story, and people don't risk everything to cross a border because life is good back home. They do so because they're desperate. You'll hear phrases like "no human is illegal," and we'll see protest signs with things like "keep families together." And for those of us who personally have friends and family that are immigrants, we understand just how complicated and difficult the process of immigration is, and that only elevates tension for a lot of people. We hear stories of kids being separated from parents, of families fleeing cartel violence, and of people just trying to survive. And then there's also the biblical arguments in support of this position. We read all of the commands in scripture to care for the foreigner, care for the outsider, and the one on the margins. We remember that, in a sense, Jesus himself experienced forced displacement. So overall, and from that perspective, there's a real concern with us being so obsessed with legal status that we forget that we're talking about image bearers with real lives. So for a lot of Christians, this entire situation can be tricky because there's a strong need to protect our borders, but also a real desire to love and care for our neighbors. However, both sides here have a massive problem that they seem to be missing. For a lot of us Christians, this isn't just about a political divide, it's a spiritual tug of war. Because the deeper you go, the more it starts to feel like both sides are handling this from the perspective of the world rather than a gospel perspective. But before we get into that, we need to take a second to mention the perfect sponsor for a video like this: Ground News. Ground News gathers articles from over 50,000 sources and shows you how they're being covered across the political spectrum so that way you can see the full picture. For example, when it comes to these riots, over 450 sources have covered the 700 Marines being deployed, and out of those, 25% are left-leaning, while 20% are right-leaning, but they're covering the story from entirely different perspectives. The left emphasizes how a defense official called this a manufactured crisis provoked by Trump, while the right frames the deployment of the Marines as supporting the National Guard. The bias couldn't be more clear. Ground News is gaining a lot of attention lately for their work. They were recently recognized by the Nobel Peace Center for their impact on media literacy. And it's not hard to see why. As you could probably tell by now, I like to get both sides of an issue and I like to think it through myself before I speak about the issue publicly. And Ground News is the perfect tool for that. So Ground News has become a valuable tool for me, especially as a Christian seeking truth and integrity in media. And if you want to try Ground News today, go ahead and go to groundnews.com/whatdoyoumeme and get 40% off of unlimited access with the Vantage plan. Okay, now back to this complex immigration problem and how both sides have a massive problem that they seem to be missing. On the one side, those against the ICE raids, we often see the trap of empathy without wisdom. The world often goes so far into embracing empathy that everything is permitted, even if it means not protecting others and doing what's best for them. This side leads with compassion, which can be a really good thing in a lot of cases, but here's where the mindset goes sideways. When compassion becomes the only value, truth gets pushed out the back door, and before you know it, lawlessness is excused, and dangerous systems and activities get a pass. The end result is that entire cities buckle under pressure because nobody wants to say, okay, enough is enough. Riots put people in danger and cost their own cities millions of dollars. And in the name of empathy and kindness, it's enablement. People stay trapped. And Jesus didn't give people a hug instead of the truth. He gave them both. Yes, our hearts should break for those that are hurting. But if that compassion doesn't come with clarity and courage, then we're not being wise, and we're also not being Christ-like. Okay, and on the flip side, there's another trap that Christians often fall into, and it's just as real. It's the accountability-only mindset. This is where we take the law and order perspective and crank the volume up until it drowns out everything else. It says, you made the choice, you broke the law, you don't get to play the victim. It sounds righteous, it feels just, but over time, something starts to shift. We stop seeing people as people, and we start reducing them down to caricatures. We stop seeing them as human beings just like us, and we start seeing them as only threats. We stop seeing them as people made in the image of God, and we start seeing them as only illegals. And here's what that perspective does to us. It makes justice feel like vengeance. It turns spiritual conviction into cultural hostility. And worst of all, it destroys our witness because when we're louder about border security than we are about wanting to show care and concern for our fellow image bearers, then we look just like the world. When we throw around Romans 13 like it's a rock in our hand, we've done what Paul warns us about, giving truth without love, which is just an annoying sound that no one wants to hear. At best, people will hear the truth as meaningless, and at worst, it also will only push them away. So yes, law matters. But if we forget the person behind the policy, we don't look like Christ anymore. We look just like the world. Okay, so what do we do with all of this? Well, as Christians, we're not called to just pick a better side. We're called to reflect the character of Christ. And when we look at the way that Jesus handled broken people and broken systems, here's what you'll notice. He doesn't echo either side. He confronts both and redirects people's view from a worldly perspective to a kingdom perspective. He didn't link arms with the accountability-only crowd. He didn't cheer for those who don't show any genuine compassion for the foreigners or the non-believers. Nor did he sanitize sin in the name of compassion. He never confused kindness with compromise, and he never shrugged off sin just because someone had a hard story. What he did instead was walk right into the middle of the mess and disarmed everyone. He exposed the self-righteousness that we on the right drift towards, and he didn't indulge in the excuses that the left often drifts into. He offers something that neither side ever saw coming: grace with teeth and truth with tears. The tension that we're seeing in LA right now is somewhat similar to what Jesus saw in Jerusalem. A woman was dragged into a crowd, caught in adultery. The law says that she should die. Those who passionately held to the law said, let's make an example out of her. And here's the thing. Technically, they're not wrong. She did break the law. They had the verses to prove it. They had precedent, they had moral clarity, and they had stones in their hands. This is what the accountability-only mindset looks like when left unchecked. A holy cause with a hardened heart. But then there's the other danger, the empathy-only side that shows up today with the excuse, she's hurting, you don't know her story, don't judge her. And again, there's some truth to that. Compassion matters, but if that's all we say, we end up excusing the very thing that broke her in the first place. And this is why Jesus didn't take either approach. He doesn't pick up a stone, he doesn't sweep her sin under the rug. Instead, he looks down into the dirt, looks the mob in the eye, and says, "Let the one without sin cast the first stone." And as you know, one by one, the stones drop. He turns to her and says something that no one would have expected. He says, "Neither do I condemn you. Now go and sin no more." Once again, Christ shows both truth and love at the same time. And that's really the gospel, isn't it? What Jesus does for us. The truth is, you're a sinner who deserves hell based on the things that you freely chose to do wrong. But there's also love. God loved you so much that he voluntarily took on the pain and punishment for you, enough to die in your place. And not only did he do all of this, he did it while showing compassion for his enemies. In the middle of Christ being literally tortured to death by his enemies, he prayed for their forgiveness. The crowd that dragged the woman thought that they were defending God's law. But Jesus exposed how they weaponized it. And today, sometimes we sound more like the mob than the Messiah. We forget that Jesus didn't come to validate our position. He came to crucify it and give us his position instead. So if you're looking for a biblical response to this immigration chaos, don't expect it to sound like a red talking point or look like a blue protest sign. It's gonna look like a savior, kneeling in the dirt, calling everyone in the crowd to drop their stones and telling them to face their own hearts first. Okay, hey, thanks so much for watching until the end. It really does help us in the algorithm when you do. And if you believe that the gospel should shape how we think in interactive culture, you can help us to keep doing that. We're a nonprofit ministry and your support makes this possible. Link down below in the description. All right, see you guys on the next one.